Hi, my name is Amanda Boysen, and I currently practice as an osteopathic manual practitioner. I opened my osteopathic clinic in 2018, but prior to that, I graduated from the University of Waterloo with a bachelor's degree in kinesiology. I have always had an affinity for understanding movement, which has led me to a previous career as a gym owner, a personal trainer, and a coach, prior to attending osteopathic school. Osteopathy was founded in the late 1800s in the United States by Dr. Andrew Taylor Still. It is based on 4 principles. The body is a dynamic unit of function, meaning that the body is one connected unit, and to function properly, it is imperative that all the pieces are taken into consideration. So this means the bones, the muscles, the ligaments, the blood flow. We cannot segregate the body into separate systems as they rely on one another to function properly. The body needs to be addressed as a whole unit. An example of this is of the vagus nerve, which controls the digestive process, but it exits the skull through the jugular foramen, which is right where your skull sits on your spine, and then has to travel through the neck and underneath the clavicles and down through the rib cage to get to its target organ, which is your digestive tract. So it's imperative that we take into consideration the fact of how the head, the neck, and the shoulders are moving in order to take care of the digestive tract or the digestive process. The second principle is that structure and function are reciprocally interrelated. This means that as the structure changes its shape, it will also change the way that that structure functions, and vice versa. So if we change the shape of the head, for example, we sit at a desk most of our day like this, it will change the function of the structures in that area. The third principle is that the body is self-healing and self-regulating. Your body has been created with everything that it needs to repair and regulate its own function. For example, as you were a child, you never told yourself to grow or change as you got older. And when you got a scrape or a cut, this is something that your body just did naturally. It naturally is set to heal and regulate without any conscious thought. And the last principle of osteopathy is that rational treatment is based on the 3 preceding principles. So you have to have a great understanding of how the body works in order to make sure that you can provide rational treatment. In all my clinical experience, there is one message I repeat to almost every client every day, and that is that movement is the key. Blood flow will circulate all the nutrients in the body, including the chemicals and hormones, through the blood, but the venous system returns the waste to be eliminated. Obstructions in movement in any joint can kink these hoses that circulate the fluids. Fluid will always travel through the path of least resistance. So when everything has to come back up into the rib cage, if you compress that area all day based on your sitting position or a position you find yourself in for the majority of your day, that can obstruct the arterial blood flow, the venous system, or the lymphatic drainage. The arterial system has a thick muscular coating to contract the arteries and pump the blood away from the heart. But the venous system doesn't have this muscular tissue. So it uses valves to ensure that there's only one way that fluids can be transported and there's no backflow. But it also relies on movements of the muscle and the joints to pump the fluids back to the heart. So for example, your elbow moving back and forth is helping fluid come back from your hands up and circulate back towards the rib cage. Movement is required for drainage. So when you look at the lymphatic system, you can notice that all of the major lymph nodes are located in areas where there's highly movable joints. So there's a huge collection of them in your shoulders, in your hips, in your knees, because they require the same movement to pump fluid back to the heart for elimination. The lymphatic system is important because this does tissue drainage, fat transport, and immune responses. Movement is important and is one of our most basic functions. Our bodies were designed to be mobile through many ranges of motion, which are dictated by the structure of the joints and how the tissue surrounding those joints influence the movement capacity. Our bodies are always trying to make its job easier by reducing the thickness in tissues to mobilize an area, but they're also going to make compensation patterns and build thicker tissue in order to stabilize areas. So it is important that there isn't too much movement in an area or too little movement in an area. both can have negative effects. We need that to be just right. As part of my practice in osteopathy, I spend the day assessing movement and finding lesion patterns. Lesion patterns are something that doesn't move and doesn't function the way that it's supposed to within the body. So I'm always looking for how things move, where the obstruction is coming from, and why it might be there and the root cause of that. And there really is 3 reasons that a lesion pattern would exist within the body. And the first is that there was a traumatic experience, which could be anything from a car accident to a broken bone or a fall from height. One that people commonly don't consider a trauma is also childbirth and pregnancy. The second is daily tasks and how we spend most of our day. So whether that might be sitting at a desk or a job that requires you to do a lot of overhead movement or anything that's really physically demanding, it's the way that you spend the most of your day. Your body, like we just discussed, will create compensation patterns to make your job easier. And lastly, it's repetitive movements through small ranges of motion. So for example, if you were a line worker in a factory, or you picked up small children all day, or our phone use, we tend to find ourselves in positions where we're constantly looking down or leaning forward and twisting. How you spend the majority of your day will be a key indicator for the health within your body. I often talk about your health or your vitality being like a bank account. So if you're constantly stressed or you're not taking care of yourself, you're going to dip into the red. If you're constantly in the red, it takes time and energy and rest and a lot of other factors to try and bring yourself up into the black. But it's important that how we spend the majority of our day allows us to stay within balance or in the black. Habits are really easy to build. We almost never consciously notice them, and they're very hard to break. Given the last year and that most of us has spent a considerable amount of time working from home or in front of some type of a screen, we're just going to review how we can change our desk setup or our way in which we do our work that can help be beneficial. And I will preface this by saying, when we talk about posture, it's often talked about as a static, hold this posture the way that it's supposed to be and stay stable. And I really see posture as being a dynamic thing, in that you should be able to move through various postures and it not be a problem. But the majority of people don't have that capacity because they either don't train that way or they spend too much of their day in an incorrect space or an incorrect position, but then it doesn't allow for them to move through those postures. So when we talk about desk setup, yes, it's about setting yourself up to be successful, but it is still really important that you're moving every day. So it's important to start by making sure that your screen is up at eye level. Whether you have a fancy stand or just some books or a small shelf, it's just important to raise that up to that height. Your keyboard should come back to about elbow height and be as close to you as your hands are when your elbows are at your sides. If you're using a laptop, it is important you get a separate keyboard so that we don't position in a way where we're leaning forward constantly and dropping our chest to reach the keyboard. When you're sitting up, it's important you keep your hips underneath your shoulders. Okay, this is why the extra keyboard is important, so that we're not in this position often. We want to try and line our shoulders and our hips up. Keeping your ears over your shoulders is another key piece. Often we find ourselves in that slouched position, and so trying to think about tucking your chin back can allow for not extending our OA joint, which is at the top of where our skull sits on our spine. And we already talked about the vagus nerve and how that can be affected. That's just one piece. Your feet should be flat on the floor. This is a common one I talk to people about, mostly because people like to cross their ankles or cross their knees or sit on their feet. In a perfect world, you're sitting with your feet flat on the floor. So if you need to use a little stool or again, something to step on, if you have shorter legs like I do, it's important that you find something to raise the floor up so that your feet can sit flat. And I'm often asked about proper posture. So remember, these are the key pieces to keeping a good posture throughout the day, but it is important that you're able to move through all ranges of motion. The second piece of advice to go with desk setup is that you move every 30 minutes. So you need to make a point to get up and walk around your office or your home or your workspace. And then I'm going to show you 3 quick exercises that can really help if you've been seated in the same position for an extended period of time. The first exercise is to raise your hands up over your head, look up at the ceiling, and take 5 deep breaths in. When you're doing this, the key piece is to think about letting your chest raise up towards the ceiling and not arching your back to make that happen. The second exercise is a seated rotation or a reach back. So you're gonna bring your hands up to shoulder height, making sure you're sitting stable and you're not letting your hips move. And you're gonna twist your rib cage, letting your eyes follow your hands to reach back behind you. The third movement is a hip circle. So standing on one foot, making sure you're standing up tall, keeping your core engaged. You can step on one foot and bring your hip up and around and bring that back. Doing this on both sides, trying to stay stable and get the most range of motion that you can through your hip. The last thing we should talk about with regards to working from a desk or in front of a screen is the 20-20-20 rule. This states that every 20 minutes you're on a screen, you should spend 20 seconds or more looking 20 feet away. How many of you have spent too long looking at a computer and when you get up to change tasks, your eyes take a minute to adjust? The 20-20-20 rule gives us a guideline to adjust your lens shape so that this doesn't happen. It's important to remember that your body is a machine, and with the proper tools and awareness, you can truly take control and optimize how you're feeling. In order to function properly, our body needs sunlight, water, movement, sleep, and proper nutrition. It's important that you figure out in what quantities that is for you, because you as an individual are different than the person sitting beside you. We often joke that every body is different in the clinic. One of my favorite quotes that I feel like describes this so well is that you have to remember you are basically just a houseplant with way more complicated emotions. So it's important to start small with consistent efforts. The graphic that I have on the slide showing 1% effort daily for a year gives an amazing visual about how small efforts can go a long way. So as a small effort, can you drink a glass of water while you're making your morning coffee? Can you adjust your desk setup to allow your shoulders to stay over your hips? Can you go for a walk on your lunch, even if it's only for 5 or 10 minutes? Change can feel overwhelming, so start slowly and use an already existing habit to create the new one. We will end things off with one of my favorite quotes, that movement is the medicine for creating a change in a person's physical, mental, and emotional states.